Good evening, everyone. It's Bryan Davis, pastor of Restoring Love Baptist Church here, and I just wanted to do a special clarification and a special episode, of the Becoming a Balanced Christian podcast. What I'm going to be doing is clarifying one of the things that we were talking about on season 1, episode 6 of the podcast, where me and David were going over John chapter 1, 1 through 3, and the divinity of Christ. So if you're watching online, excuse my appearance and the look of the room. As you can see, I'm in my office here at home. So I hope that this will still be enlightening to you. We're going to go over this short passage in depth, and I'm going to try to clarify and break it down as best as I can. So I am going to share my screen, and we're going to do what I can for you. So let's go ahead and bring it up. So let's go ahead and look at this here. As we went over today, we were looking at this very important passage within God's Word. It was John chapter 1, verse 1. And I was trying to explain how the Jehovah's Witnesses will actually use this verse against a Christian at the doorstep, trying to prove that Jesus is not God. But that's not the case, guys. As I was trying to explain in that podcast, this verse actually teaches that Jesus is God. And we need to really break that down and help you understand it. So if you're listening to this podcast on your favorite app, it might be helpful to go to YouTube and look us up there so you can see my screen. So that way you can better understand what I'm trying to teach, because these doctrines are very complex and also very important to understand as a Christian. The technical term for this doctrine is actually called the Theanthropic union of Jesus Christ, where the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. The Theanthropic union is important because it shows how Jesus is fully God and fully man at the same time. The word theanthropic comes from two Greek words, theos and anthropos, the word for God and the word for man. So the theanthropic union is the union of God and man in one person, of Jesus Christ. Now, this verse shows where Jesus came from, which is key because there's so many wild and wacky theories of where Jesus came from and what his origins were. So let's break this down and help you really understand it. And it's not going to take too long, I assure you. It says in John chapter 1, verse 1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. Now, that sounds pretty straightforward. And I'll get into why Jesus is called the Word here in just a moment. But for the time being, I want to take a look at the Greek equivalent on the right side of your screen there. And please don't be afraid of this. Remember, this is just a different language saying the exact same thing. You have here, as you can see with my cursor, in arche ein ha logos, kai ha logos, ein pros ton theon, kai theos ein ha logos. And a loose translation of that in the word order of the Greek language is in beginning, continuously was the Word. And the Word continuously was with the God. And God continuously was the Word. Slightly different word order between the Greek and English. And the reason for that is because English portrays parts of speech according to word order, while Greek does not. The word order in Greek does not matter at all whenever it comes to parts of speech, like whether it is a subject or a verb or indirect object. It doesn't matter one bit. What the word order in the Greek emphasizes is, well, that emphasis. So when we look at the Greek here in John 1:1, we see in beginning was the Word. So the emphasis is that the Word was in the beginning. The beginning of what? Well, the beginning of all things. This is John going back to Genesis 1:1 when God created the heavens and the earth. And how do we know that? Well, we know that by scrolling down here to verse 3, where it says, all things were made through him, and without him nothing was made that was made. So this is creation talk. So he's setting up the context of this passage. He's showing that this being called the Word was in the beginning and was the creator alongside of God. And that's very key to remember, because we have to always keep in consideration the context when we try to pick apart verses like this. Now, let's break down this verse a little bit more before I describe why Jesus is called the Word here. Because remember, how do we know that Jesus is the Word? Well, you have to go down to verse 14. And it shows us. In verse 14, the Bible says, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. The glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And later on in the passage, it describes how John the Baptist bore witness of him and all that. And when you cross-reference that with the other Gospels, you can tell that, hey, that was certainly Jesus. Because Jesus is the only one that John the Baptist baptized and bore witness of. You can read that in all the Gospels. It is very, very clear. Just read the first couple verses, chapters of each Gospel, and you'll see that clear. That's Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So don't let that be too confusing or concerning. So the Word is Jesus. The context certainly teaches that. So excuse me for a second as I scroll back up on my screen here. So let's get back to verse 1 of chapter 1, and let's start breaking this down. Since we know from the context that Jesus is certainly the Word, and no one disputes that, the context is certainly clear. The Bible clearly says, written through the Apostle John, that in the beginning continuously was the Word. Now, I explained in the podcast that word was, and over here in the Greek, it's signified by the word ein, right there, was what we called an imperfect past tense. And if you remember, we went over 3 different past tenses in the Greek. It was aorist, perfect, and imperfect. Unlike the English, English has them too, they're just not really defined. But in the Greek, they're very emphasized, the 3 different parts of the past tense. The aorist was the undefined past tense. It just says that something happened in the past and doesn't really give any information other than it happened. While the perfect was a past action that has some sort of present ramification. And what I mean by present ramification is this. It happened in the past, but we still feel it in the present. And I gave an example of, I have been doing the dishes all night. That implies I started early in the night and I'm still working on it now. But maybe even a better illustration was, I was born. Because you're still alive today. That birth had present ramifications. So that would be the perfect tense. Now, imperfect is a past continuous action that came to a cessation or came to an end. And this is where the podcast might have gotten a little bit confusing, because I don't think I clarified enough why the Word existed in the beginning. and it came to an end. It was a continual existence that came to an end. And the reason why that might have been confusing is because I didn't give enough context. What is this verse talking about? What it's saying is, in the beginning of time, when the heavens and earth were created, the Word, or Jesus, was continually existing. When did that continual existence, according to the context, end? Well, it would have been at the beginning of time. And that makes sense, because here's the reason. We're dealing with eternity past, pre-existence. Eternity ended when time began. Eternity is infinite. Time is finite. So the moment that Jesus spoke the world into existence, they transitioned from eternity past to existing in time, in some sense. And that's the thrust of the Greek word there. To continually exist before the beginning and at the beginning is to imply that that being is eternal, that it never had a beginning, that he never had a beginning. And how do we know he never had a beginning? Because he began the beginning. He created the heavens and the earth. He pre-existed it. So the fact that was is in the imperfect, or a continual existence, is showing his eternality before the creation. And I wanted to clear that up so that way people couldn't accuse David and I of being contradictory or being irrational, because the Bible is very rational when it comes to this verse. But let's keep reading and see here. It says, in the beginning, or the beginning of creation, beginning of time, continuously existed the Word. So he was eternal and still is eternal, uncreated, the first cause of all things. And the Word continually was with the God. And we see it's the same Greek word here. It's ein again. He continually existed with or alongside of God. And the Word continually existed as God. See, he was eternal and he was continually equal to God for all eternity. And John goes the extra mile to make sure we understand this. He, Jesus, was in the beginning with God. And let's scroll down on the Greek and say here, he, hutos, ein, continuously was in, arche, the beginning, pros, with, tone, the, God, theon. So, once again, it is clear that Jesus not only eternally existed before and at the beginning, that he was uncreated and eternal, but also the Word existed eternally alongside with God. And the Word continuously existed as God. So you have two clearly defined people here in this passage, the Word and God, who are co-equal, co-eternal, and existed side by side with one another. The Bible couldn't be more clear on that. And where we know down in verses 14 and 15 that the Word is Jesus, this is a strong indication of divinity within Jesus' life. But it doesn't stop there, because now let's explain why Jesus is called the Word in the first place, because this is key as well, and I want you to really understand this. Back in those days, the Hebrew word for God, his proper name was what we call Yahweh. It was Yahweh. But here's the thing. That was the Hebrew word for God, his proper name. Hebrew does not have vowel points. The vowels are understood. So based on context and other factors, they interject vowel points in order so they can speak their language. It wasn't until years later that the vowel points were actually interjected into the Hebrew to give some sort of standardization to the pronunciation of the words. But because of that caused the Jews to take some crazy steps towards making sure God and his name was not dishonored. Number one, they took the vowel points from Adonai and interjected them into Yahweh and formed the word Jehovah. Because when you did that, it would have been the Hebrew word Yehovah, and we would say it Jehovah. Just a side note, not really relevant to what we're talking about, but that's something that you could always throw out to the Jehovah's Witnesses. In reality, their God has a made-up name. But in this instance, there's a second thing that happened. Anytime God was used in anthropomorphic terms, and what I mean by anthropomorphic, when the Bible used him and described him in human terms, the Jews would substitute Yahweh with the Hebrew word for word. So an example of this is if the Bible said that the hand of the Lord was upon them, or something similar to that, describing God who has no body, the invisible God in human terms so we can understand it. Some of the legalistic pious Jews would substitute hand of the Lord for the word of the Lord. So the word became synonymous with Yahweh in the Old Testament, in later manuscripts. And we can see that throughout history. Therefore, when we read this in John 1:1, where John, the Apostle John, clearly says that Jesus was the Word and that he was eternal, the Creator, existing alongside of God, and was equal to God. This was a strong declaration of his deity. Hands down. The Jews would have known exactly what John was trying to say. So the Jews were very livid against, this doctrine. They were just so angry at it because they took that as blasphemy. But here's the thing. The Old Testament prophesied in so many places that Jesus would come. The Messiah would come. I mean, I think of Isaiah 9 where it clearly says that he would be God. And so many, but that's a different podcast. But we still have to handle one other problem within the text that the Jehovah's Witnesses will certainly bring up. And that is the last clause in verse 1 where it says, and the Word was God. They do not translate it that way or interpret it that way because they say he was a God in the New World Translation. So let's break that one down. So before we start breaking down what the Jehovah's Witnesses accuse the Bible of saying, I cannot emphasize enough that the Greek word ein there, which is was, is not saying that, Jesus or God ceased from being eternal or anything like that. It's more of just a marker showing that before the beginning they were eternal. They continuously existed up until the beginning, and that thought of them continuously existed kind of ended at the beginning. But they still are very much eternal, guys. I mean, they're going to last forever. The Bible says that Jesus is the same yesterday, today, and forever. I mean, it does not mean that he is no longer eternal, that his eternality stopped, that God somehow stopped being a transcendent eternal being by stepping into this world and leaving behind his eternality. That's not what it's saying. It's just emphasizing the fact that the Word was with God and was uncreated. and was eternal and was the first cause that spoke everything into existence. Keep that in mind. Now, the Jehovah's Witnesses hate that idea, and they try to distort it by retranslating and reinterpreting the very last clause in this passage. And the word was God, there at the end of verse 1. They will translate it, and the word was a God. And there's a reason for that. If you look on your screen over here on the Greek side, I want to point out a couple of things. See this word here, logos and theon. All right? Before logos is this word right here, ha. That is the definite article the. The same word is right here, tone, which is the definite article the. And the reason why it looks different is because it's just modifying a different form of theos. And I'm not going to get into that. Whenever it comes to parts of speech and stuff like that in Greek, word order, as I said, doesn't matter. It's all endings based. So when a definite article modifies the Greek form of theos, which is theon, it's going to have the same ending so you can see which word it's modifying. That's all that is. That's technical. Don't worry about it. Just keep in mind that, if the part of speech is signified by ending in Greek and not by the word order. So if it's a direct object, indirect object, participle, whatever, it's going to take a different ending. So keep that in mind. Well, anytime you have a noun that is preceded by a definite article, what that is showing is it is a proper noun. So we would translate it with a capital letter. So look at this. You got the word was with the God there in the middle. And over here in the English, and the word, big W, was with God, big G. Proper names, proper nouns, make sense. Well, look at the last clause here in the Greek. And theos, God, was the word. The definite article is missing in front of theos. There should be a definite article there. Well, the Jehovah's Witnesses love that, and that's why they translate that with a little g. But what they don't understand is that there is a Greek grammar rule called the Caldwell Rule, which says that when there are two nouns separated by a definite by a to be verb, like was or is or something like that, and the second noun has a definite article, that definite article may be carried over before the other noun. So there is an understood ha or the in front of theos there, or God, the God. There's understood that the Greek allows that. That is a grammar rule. And as I said, the Jehovah's Witnesses will agree with our translations on every other passage, but this one does not fit their agenda. We have to remember that and realize that. And John used this construction for a reason, because if he said, and the God was the Word, and keep in mind, we just dropped the definite article in English because it's our grammar rule versus theirs. It's just a translational thing. But if John would have said the God was the Word, what he would have been saying is that the God and the Word were the same person. But that was a heresy cleared up in the 3rd century AD. Instead, what he's showing here is that they're not the same person, but they're of the same essence. Of the same essence. So they're both, that definite article can carry over in front of theos, but he left it off because he wanted to show that they were the same God, but two different people, existing side by side together. This is a Trinitarian passage. This is showing that Jesus is in fact equal to God in every way, is eternal, and existed alongside of God from eternity. It's a strong, strong passage. But remember, what this does not mean is that somehow Jesus and God left eternality. They've always been eternal. It's just a signifier that word ain is just a signifier that the Word existed alongside of God from all eternity before the beginning. So I hope that that is helpful to you, and that you can kind of understand that and take that to the bank. Okay? So, with nothing else really to say tonight, if you have any questions regarding John 1:1, please don't hesitate to write us or to call us, and we'll be more than happy to clear that up for you. But on behalf of us here at Restoring Love Baptist Church and the Becoming a Balanced Christian podcast, this is Pastor Bryan Davis wishing you a good night, and we'll see you on Monday.